It was supposed to be just another fiery TV interview, lights blazing, cameras rolling, and the host, Alan Diarra, known for his sharp tongue and ambush-style questions, was ready to stir trouble. Across from him sat President Ibrahim Traoré, calm and alone in his simple military uniform. No security, no entourage, just him. Alan leaned in with a smirk. "Mr. Traoré," he began, voice cutting like a blade. "How does a man with no political background lead a country plagued by terrorism and poverty?" The air thickened. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged nervous glances, but Alan wasn't done. He pushed harder. "Some say you're just playing soldier in a real man's game. What do you say to that?" The room went dead quiet. An assistant dropped her clipboard. Someone whispered, "This is too far." But President Traoré didn't blink. He locked eyes with Alan, steady, unshaken. And then he spoke, slow and sure. "Do you ask those who bleed for their people to prove their worth? Or do you stand with them and ask what you can give?" The entire studio froze. And that was just the beginning. Miles away, in a dusty living room, a 10-year-old boy named Karim sat cross-legged on the floor, his shirt worn and oversized, his grandmother coughing beside him. The TV signal was fuzzy, but Karim couldn't look away. He didn't know politics. He barely knew who the man on screen was. But he felt something in that voice. Warmth, strength, someone who understood what it meant to sleep on the floor. Back in the studio, Alan fired another shot. "You speak of sacrifice, Mr. President, but will you admit your government has failed where others warned you?" Karim's tiny fists clenched. He whispered, "Let him speak." And Ibrahim did gently. "I didn't come here to prove I'm perfect," he said. "I came to serve even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Karim blinked. He'd never heard a leader talk like that. And in that moment, he felt hope. Up in the control room, producer Lucy was sweating. She'd scheduled this interview for ratings to trip him up to make headlines. But what she got was something else. Something real. Her hand trembled over the control board. Then her phone rang. A direct line. "Do not cut the feed," said a firm voice. From the Prime Minister's office. "Let the people hear him. Let the truth speak." Back on set, Alan tried one last time. "Tell us, Mr. President, why should we believe in a man with no elite background, no political name?" The camera zoomed in. Traoré didn't flinch. "Because I was that boy who sold mangoes to pay for school. Because I still walk where others drive. And because power to me isn't a crown, it's a burden. And I carry it for them." In the control room, Lucy wiped her eyes. She didn't know why she was crying, but she knew this was history. Behind the curtain, a young intern named Adama stood frozen. It was his first week. His only job was to refill water. But now he couldn't move. He was witnessing something he'd never forget. No guards, no grand speeches. Just one man calmly answering questions. With quiet strength, like someone who had lived through pain, not just studied it. Backstage, Adama watched from the shadows. Just a few months ago, he would have rolled his eyes at this moment. His father, a soldier, had died in the north, fighting terrorists. Since then Adama had hated anything linked to the military, but something in the way President Ibrahim Traoré spoke. Not about power but about carrying the weight of others broke through that wall. This wasn't a man chasing glory. He was standing alone for millions. On stage, the journalist narrowed his eyes. "I see your medals," he said, voice laced with sarcasm. "But do medals feed our people?" Traoré didn't blink. His reply was soft, but solid. "No, they don't. But the sacrifices behind them protect those who do the feeding." Adama's breath caught. For the first time since his father's funeral, he smiled. "Papa would have followed this man," he whispered. Far away in a dim living room on the edge of Bobo Dioulasso, 10-year-old Karim sat on the floor, tears quietly running down his cheeks. Not loud tears, just the kind that fall when something too big cracks open in a small heart. His grandmother, fragile and ill, had dozed off beside him. But Karim kept watching, eyes locked on the man on screen, a man dressed like a warrior, but speaking like a teacher. Then came another jab from the journalist. "What makes you think you know what's best for this country?" Traoré paused, then answered, "Because I've slept in the rain. I've taught children with no shoes. I've buried friends without coffins. I know pain. I know hunger. And I've seen hope in the darkest places. Karim's chest HDHD. He remembered being kicked out of school for unpaid fees, crying in his grandma's arms that night. And now this president, this stranger, was speaking for boys like him. Karim grabbed his school notebook and began to sketch the man's face. Below it, he wrote one word, hope. Back in the control booth, Lucy stared at the live view account. 400,000. 530,000. 7 to 80,000. The numbers were exploding. She'd expected fireworks, a stumble, a PR disaster. Instead, she was watching something rare. Humility on national television. Alan, the journalist, was getting restless now. His questions were harsher, more desperate. Isn't it true? He snapped. That some people say your leadership is just a military stunt. But Traoré stayed calm. There are those who wear uniforms to control, he said. And those who wear them to protect. I chose the second. For the first time, the studio audience clapped. Alan froze. That wasn't part of the plan. In the booth, Lucy's assistant leaned in. Should we cut the feed? Lucy didn't answer. She couldn't. Tears were already running down her face. Her father, a soldier, once called her from the front lines, whispering goodbye before a mission he never returned from. She had buried that memory. But now, this man on screen, he was bringing it all back. Not through speeches, but truth. Quiet, undeniable truth. Then came the hardest question yet. Do you ever feel guilty? Alan asked, sitting in power while mothers bury their sons. Even the crew flinched. But Traoré didn't lash out. He looked straight ahead, his voice cracked just slightly. Every single night, he swallowed. I write their names in my journal. I visit their families. I walk their villages. Power doesn't protect me from pain. It forces me to carry it. No one clapped. No one moved. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, like a heartbeat held still. Alan stared at his notes, suddenly unsure what to say next. Backstage, Adama wiped his face again and realized his hands were wet. The boy who once resented uniforms now saw them differently. For the first time, it felt like someone in power actually cared. Back on stage, Traoré adjusted his jacket. I visited a camp in Kaya, he said quietly. I met a little girl named Aminata. The air shifted. Everyone leaned in. She was 7. Her father died in a rebel attack. Her mother from illness. She was completely alone, and yet she smiled. The journalist fired another question, sharp and dismissive. What does that even have to do with policy? Traoré looked at him, not with anger but with quiet sorrow. Everything, he said softly. She told me if I can smile, maybe others will too. He paused. That little girl reminded me, leadership isn't about control. It's about healing. The room went still. You could feel hearts tightening. In the audience, a woman named Carter broke down in tears. She had lost her son to a roadside bomb 3 years ago and hadn't watched politics since. But now, for the first time in years, she wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from relief. Someone was finally speaking from the soul. Back in the control room, phones were ringing non-stop. We've got calls coming in from Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Lucy's assistant shouted. Another producer yelled. France just aired a clip. It's everywhere. And yet through it all, Traoré hadn't raised his voice once. He didn't need to. The world was listening. Alan, now visibly sweating, tried one final jab. If you really loved the people, wouldn't you step down and let a civilian lead? The trap was obvious. But Traoré didn't flinch, he nodded. One day, yes, but not yet. The house is on fire, and I'm the one holding the hose. He leaned in. When it's safe, I'll leave. Not for glory, but so the next leader can plant seeds without fearing the flames. The cameraman whispered, "Murd." Alan leaned back, stunned. Everyone in that studio felt it. Something had shifted. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was personal. Across Burkina Faso, fathers pulled their sons a little closer. Mothers reached for tissues and kids stared at the screen, whispering a word they rarely used for leaders. Respect. Suddenly, during a pause, someone handed Traoré a folded piece of paper. He opened it, read silently, then looked up at the Camera. Permission to share. Something, he asked. Alan, unsure, nodded. This is a letter, Traore said, holding it gently. From Captain Sibi. He died yesterday in Jibwa. He asked me to read this if he ever didn't make it home. The studio froze. His voice, calm but thick, with feeling carried across the silence. Mom presided, if I die, please tell my son why I fought. Not for medals, not for power, but so he can play football without hearing gunshots. So he can go to school with both shoes so he can smile. Traore folded the letter with care and placed it in his jacket. Captain Sidby was 31. His wife is watching now with their 3-year-old son. The camera slowly panned to Alan's pale, wordless face. In the control room, Luce's hands shook. This was no longer a broadcast. This was something else, something real. And just when everyone thought the moment couldn't grow heavier, Traoré surprised them. Again. I'd like to invite someone. Alan blinked. Excuse me. From behind the curtain, a young woman stepped forward. She wore plain clothes and walked with quiet strength. This, Trey said, is Fatima, a nurse. She's been working alone in a hospital inside a conflict zone in Father and Gurma. The audience stirred. Fatima gave a small shy wave. Then she stepped to the microphone. I've stitched wounds without anesthesia, she said. I've comforted crying children with no families left. I do it because our people matter. Her voice cracked. Last week, rebels attacked our clinic. I hid 2 babies under a table with my own body. If the army hadn't come, if President Traore hadn't acted, those babies would be gone. The room sat in silence, stunned, overwhelmed, humbled. Outside the studio, hundreds had gathered, holding candles, watching through the windows. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a movement. The station had planned a commercial break, but Traore leaned toward the mic and whispered, 1 minute. The crew scrambled to adjust. He looked straight into the lens. My father was a farmer. My mother taught me to read under a mango tree. We had no electricity, but we had love. He paused, his voice low, but unwavering. That's what shaped me. Not titles, not uniforms. I don't pretend to be perfect. But every decision I make, I ask myself, would my mother be proud of this? Would that little boy in Jibwa understand it? And in that moment, no bright spotlight, no applause cue, just one man telling the truth and a nation listening. And then silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the kind you fill with words, just heavy, honest, quiet. The kind that says everything. Outside the studio, the crowd began singing the national anthem. Softly at first, like a whisper, then stronger together. Inside, Fatima pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs. Adama, watching from a dusty tea shop across the city, stood up without even realizing. He just rose. The cameras kept rolling, not because they were told to, but because no one dared look away. In under 48 hours, this interview had become something else entirely. A reckoning, a mirror, a moment the world wasn't ready for. And just when everyone thought it was over, Ibrahim Traore reached into his coat again. I got a message yesterday, he said quietly, almost like he was talking to one person. It's from a 12-year-old boy in the north. His name is Yakuba. He unfolded a piece of paper and began to read slowly, letting every word land. Dear Mr. President, I want to be brave. Like you. My father died when bandits came. My mother cries at night. I don't want toys. I just want to feel safe. Please don't give up on us, Yakuba. Alan's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Traore looked directly into the lens. I hear you, Yakuba, and I'm not giving up. Hundreds of kilometers away in a tiny village, Yakuba sat beside his mother, near an old crackling radio. She wept quietly. In the studio, no one moved. In homes across the country, viewers sat frozen. In that moment, it wasn't about politics anymore. It was about people. It was personal. For the first time, they didn't see a man in power. They saw a father, a brother, a protector, someone who listened. Alan finally spoke, but his voice had changed. Softer, less sure. Mr. President, isn't all this emotion just theater? Isn't it easier to read letters than build a country? Sharp silence. Traore didn't answer with words. He stood, walked to the center of the studio, and sat on the floor. People held their breath. "I've walked barefoot to school," he said. "I've eaten from one bowl with 10 cousins. My leadership doesn't come from books. It comes from pain." He pointed at the camera. "If all you see is a man performing, then you've missed the point. This isn't about me. It's about what we owe the people who have lost everything." Even Alan looked down. Traoré's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm not acting. I'm remembering." That line split the air like lightning. Not just through the studio, but across the entire country. Veterans at home stood and saluted. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Even Alan's producer, stone-faced until now, quietly wiped away a tear. And still, the storm wasn't done. That night, the streets of Ouagadougou filled with candlelight. No one organized it. No one told them to come. They just did. Children held hands. Old men raised faded flags. Women stood with framed photos of sons, husbands, brothers. The city didn't burn with anger. It glowed with hope. A soft chant floated through the air. Nusuma. Zuni. Nusuma. Zuni. We are still standing. From a window in his modest home, Traoré watched it unfold. He turned to his aide. "Not a word from me," he whispered. "Let the people speak now." In a small hospital in Jibwa, Fatima placed a candle beneath a photo of Captain Sidbi. In a village far away, Yakuba's mother held him close and kissed his head. And in the TV station, Alan sat alone. The interview replayed on a small monitor. He paused. It had Traoré's final line. "I'm not acting. I'm remembering." He stared at the screen. For the first time in his life, he understood what real leadership looked like. But something was happening, something no one had predicted. The air outside the station felt different now, heavier, electric. The story had spread like wildfire. The journalist who had tried to corner Ibrahim Traoré had vanished from public view. 2 full days, nothing. Alan Diarra, once famous for his razor-sharp questions, was now a man wrestling with his own conscience. Inside his dark apartment, unshaven and shaken, he played the interview again. Line by line, every question, every smirk, every trap he tried to set. Now, all of it felt cruel. But what shattered him most was how the president responded. Not with rage, not with deflection, but with quiet, unwavering truth. Alan turned to his window. 2 barefoot kids walked by, laughing, holding nothing but a stick and a dream. And for the first time in years, he remembered who he used to be. Alan used to be like them, those 2 kids in the street. Once he had wanted to use his voice to defend the voiceless. Somewhere along the way he lost that. He had turned his platform into a weapon, not to protect, but to humiliate those who served. That night, alone in his apartment, he collapsed to the floor and wept. Then he stood up. He knew what he had to do. Something bigger than an apology. Something the world would remember. The next morning, he requested airtime. At first, the station hesitated, but one look in his eyes and they understood. This wasn't for ratings. It was for redemption. Alan stepped into the same studio. Same lights, same chair, same camera, but this time no suit, just a plain shirt. And a face stripped of pride. When the red light blinked on, he looked straight into the lens, not with arrogance, but trembling honesty. "I failed all of you," he began. "I tried to corner a man who has given his life to protect us. I used my voice to divide when I should have used it to unite." He paused, his eyes wet. "But President Traoré showed me and the world what real leadership looks like." He stood tall, not for himself, but for every Birkin Bay child, mother and soldier. "That is the man I now admire." There was silence across the country. Then cheers, then tears, and then a door opened. Traoré walked in. Not planned. Not invited, but welcome. He walked to Alan, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said just 6 words. "This is how nations begin to heal." That evening, President Traoré didn't attend a palace dinner or a political summit. He walked the streets of Ouagadougou. Quietly, humbly. Alan walked beside him. No cameras, no guards. In a small village on the edge of the city, they stopped. A group of barefoot boys played with sticks and stones. One ran up to Traoré, curious and bright-eyed. "Are you the man from TV?" the boy asked. Traoré smiled. I am, he said. But more importantly, I'm your servant. The boy blinked. You serve people. Traoré knelt down beside him. Every real leader does. A bystander recorded that moment. Traoré holding the boy's hand and walking him home. The video went viral across Africa. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. That week ended with no fireworks, no grand declarations, just a quiet memory of humility, of redemption, of unity. And from that day on, Burkina Faso didn't remember the argument. They remembered the healing, not the question, but the answer. Did this story move you? Did you feel something deep in your heart? Then don't scroll past without showing it. Comment, I believe in hope. Like this video, too. Spread the message of humility and leadership. Subscribe for more true stories that don't just touch lives, they change them. Let's remind the world, sometimes the strongest voice is the one that speaks softly. And the greatest power is love for your people.